This episode of the Lutheran Cartographer is brought to you by the Ron Paul Homeschool Curriculum. If you're looking for a good curriculum, check it out at lutherancartographer.com/homeschool. The Lutheran Cartographer, Episode 35. Welcome to the Lutheran Cartographer, the podcast where we explore what it's like to be Lutheran in different places. I'm your host, Nicholas Weber. Today we're going to Boise, Idaho to talk to Pastor Timothy Pauls of Good Shepherd Lutheran Church. Pastor Pauls, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Nicholas. Thanks for the invitation.
Absolutely. So help orient us geographically. We're out in the west in Idaho. Where exactly is Boise?
Yeah, so if you're familiar with Idaho, you've got the big southern part and the panhandle. And if you chop off the panhandle, we're kind of at the western side of what's left of the state. So down in southern Idaho, right along the interstate, you'll drive by Boise and almost see it, but not quite.
So if you were to go, say, directly east from Eugene, Oregon, would that about hit Boise then?
That would be about right, I think. Yeah, because you have to go a little bit north to get to Portland. So I think due east of Eugene would be about right.
Okay, sounds good. So tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came to Boise.
Yeah, so I've been in Boise at Good Shepherd now for 22 years. I arrived here as the assistant pastor in 1998. It's my second call. I was a pastor up in Haley, Idaho, up in the mountains for 4.5 years before then. I grew up in Seattle and went to school in Portland. Went to seminary in St. Louis, so it was good to get back out to the Northwest. And I've been living here ever since. I'm married. We have 2 boys who grew up in Boise, and now one is married and one is going to be a senior in college this next year. So it's been the place where we've raised our family.
Fantastic. So tell us a little bit more about those good things about Boise and about why it was a good place or a place to raise a family.
Yeah, so Boise is an interesting city of I've lived in Seattle, Portland, Seattle, twice, I guess, St. Louis and San Antonio. Boise is a big enough city for city conveniences without a lot of the big city problems. So there's about 700,000 people in the Treasure Valley. 400,000 of those are right in Boise here. And so it's a fairly good-sized city, but it's also extremely isolated. The next big cities of any size are Portland to the west and Seattle to the northwest, and those are, at least 500 miles away. And then going to the east, there's Salt Lake City. That's about a 6-7 hour drive, and beyond that is Denver, Colorado. So we're kind of an isolated, good-sized city, and that means that if you're going to find anything in Idaho, it's probably going to be here. So the seat of government is in Boise. All the trauma centers for the Intermountain West are here at the hospitals in Boise. There are several military bases around. So all sorts of different activities and industries and things going on. It's a relatively conservative place. It's been a great place to raise a family. It's a pretty calm place. Seattle and Portland right now especially are known for a lot of demonstrations, and there's probably there's probably a smaller spectrum of political disagreement in Boise, but I think it's handled a lot more diplomatically here too. So it's a calm place. We have 4 seasons. We'll have a couple days in the summer that get up over 100, a couple nights during the winter that get below freezing or below zero. So it's and I guess the other thing about Boise is once you get outside the city limits, you're in the wilderness right away. So we're a high desert territory. Just south of us, the desert stretches down through Nevada. That's just south of us, and to the north of us, then we get into the mountains that stretch up to Canada. And so whether you like desert activities or fishing and hunting up north, you can get into the wilderness in half an hour easily from Boise. Just a marvelous place.
Excellent. That sounds really good. So going back to what you said earlier, it really does kind of encapsulate that big city conveniences without the big city problems, as you put it, then.
Yeah, I would say so. Now we have been discovered. Lots of people are moving to Boise these days, which on the one hand means that the restaurants are getting better. On the other hand, it means that the traffic is getting worse. So it's trying to find that nice happy medium between big enough and too big, and making adjustments along the way.
I see. So let's talk about the flip side. What are some of the challenges about being in Boise?
So the isolation is kind of a challenge in some ways, just because if say our families aren't in Boise and they're not, then they're just far away, and so it can be a little bit isolating at times to be here. But again, with an airport close by, that's not a big deal. I think the biggest complaints right now in Boise are the traffic patterns. We really don't have the infrastructure for people who are moving here right now. And then housing prices are skyrocketing along with property taxes, and nobody likes to pay more money. So those are the big things. There's always concern about where the neighborhood's going, where the city is going, and things like that. But that's living in society with your fellow citizens, I suppose.
I suppose so. What else are some of the challenges? What other things do you face?
It really is. Those are really things that come to mind. Crime is relatively low in Boise. Unless your air conditioning fails during the summer months, it's a pretty ideal spot for us to be.
Excellent. Okay. How does it compare with some of the other places that you've been in terms of how would you contrast it with, say, St. Louis or when you were up in northern Idaho?
Again, Idaho is by far the most politically conservative place that I've lived. Boise itself is kind of liberal, but the state is quite conservative. Compared to Seattle, I miss the water. This is the desert. It's not by the ocean, and so we have rivers, but a lot of dry air. St. Louis is an old city. It's got a lot of sprawl to it, and a lot of parts that could use rebuilding. Boise is just not that. It's not that old of a city out west. State history for Boise runs back 150 years instead of back to 200 or 300 years, and the city itself reflects that. In all the other places I've lived, except for small town Idaho, the cities were big enough and old enough where there was a bad part of town to stay out of. Boise really doesn't have a bad part of town. I mean, there's crime, but there's not a place where you say don't go out there at night because you'll get in trouble. Compared to St. Louis, the humidity is marvelously low here. If anything, it's a little bit too low, but I'll take the dry heat over humidity anytime. Yeah, and I think just the other thing is with the size of the city. I can be anywhere I need to be in the city in 20, 25 minutes or less. Whereas with the I-5 corridor, be it Portland or Seattle, it takes a while to get around places, and you have to plan a lot more. Whereas in Boise, you can get to places spontaneously pretty quickly overall.
Okay, that makes sense. One of the things you said earlier when you were comparing and contrasting things, you mentioned how some things need to be updated. I had the experience where I was driving through South Dakota in the early 2000s, and I walked into a mall and it felt like I'd walked into the early 90s or the late 80s. Is that the kind of feeling when you say things need updated, or do you mean something else?
Yeah, so mostly in Boise, it's the infrastructure of roads and bridges and things like that, just because there's twice as much traffic and the same number of lanes as before. So any major east-west or north-south arterial right now is or has been recently under construction. So there's a lot of construction delays. The downtown Boise doesn't really need to be rebuilt. A lot of it is getting built for the first time, because for the longest time you'd have a couple of buildings and then a big dirt lot where nobody had ever built before. And now downtown is pretty much filled in with the vacant lots and things. And and now that's spreading out to the other areas of Boise, where if buildings are, or if neighborhoods, businesses are 40, 50 years old, the strip malls are looking kind of dilapidated, and that's getting slowly gentrified once again. But the stuff that really needs help is transportation around here, just twice as many cars and the same number of roads.
I see. Now let's talk about what it's like to be Lutheran in Boise. Is Lutheranism known in the area? What's it like to be a Lutheran there?
Yeah, so people really don't know much about Lutherans here. The biggest religious population in Idaho is of course Mormon, this close to Utah. The second biggest is Roman Catholic, and then after that you have a lot of Protestant evangelical churches, but very few people know what a Lutheran is, and most people associate the name Lutheran with our with more liberal Lutheran church bodies in the Missouri Synod. So I've had people call up the church before and simply ask if we're part of if we're Christians or not. So it's in some ways a marvelous blank slate. Because people really don't have a lot of expectations once they understand that we're not say an ELCA congregation, and at the same time you with a blank slate you've got to start at zero and build from there. My dad is from Sheboygan Falls, Wisconsin, and I think there are more LCMS churches in Sheboygan Falls than there are in all of South Idaho. And so on the bright side, we're not stepping on each other's toes all the time. The next Lutheran church isn't across the street. On the other hand, you really don't have any sort of a culture and not a whole lot of fraternity because we're just spread out so far.
I see. So where is the nearest Lutheran LCMS church?
There's one other Lutheran church in Boise. It's on the other side of town. That's Beautiful Savior Lutheran Church, and then to our west there would be two in Meridian, one in Nampa, one in Caldwell, and then from there it's all the way to Ontario, Oregon before the next one. So our circuit runs about 160 miles east-west and about 80 miles. Maybe 100 miles north-south, and that's only about 11 congregations.
I see. Okay. So let's take a moment just to say a little bit more about what it's like to be and what the situation is like to be among so many Mormons. What challenges does that present or opportunities?
Yeah, so in the city of Boise itself, Boise has changed and grown enough where there isn't near as much of a Mormon influence as there was when I first got here. The city itself has become far more secularized and I think politically liberal than the Mormon Church would be comfortable with. In the outlying towns and areas, that influence is, of course, far more pronounced. So, once upon a time, I think I had far more encounters with Mormons than I do now. They're on the one hand, they emphasize citizenship and being good neighbors an awful lot. They tragically use the same words as we do to talk about a religion that has nothing to do with the gospel. So it takes some time to unravel what the words mean before you can have a meaningful conversation. I've had some folks talk about how their kids, if they're Lutheran, can't find friends in school because they're Lutheran and everybody else is Mormon. And I suppose that happens. I just really have never experienced that kind of opposition. We've pretty much gotten along with the neighbors just fine.
That's good. Now let's talk about what it's like to raise a family there. You mentioned you raised your two boys there. What's it like for families?
Yeah, so Boise is a great place, I think, to raise a family. Again, the culture is relatively conservative, and so you want kind of a conservative moral place as much as you can find to raise a family. And it's certainly not the Garden of Eden, but it's not like a real progressive agenda is evident either. The public schools are they're public schools. You can get an education. They're not a great one, and of course not a Christian one. We enrolled our kids once we had a Lutheran school here at Good Shepherd that closed down when my oldest was in 6th grade. So we enrolled our kids in a classical Christian school in Meridian, the next town over, and that's one of the many private school options that are available in the area, and they got a great education there. Activities wise, you've got organized sports in town. You've got fishing and hunting just out of town. All sorts of different activities. Boise's big enough where you can have some science clubs and chess clubs and things for the more intellectual kinds. And so there's certainly a wide variety of activities for kids, and I think still a pretty good respect for the nuclear family.
Excellent. Let's take a moment for a word from our sponsor. At this time, a lot of parents and grandparents are considering keeping their children at home when the government schools open back up in the fall, and I would encourage you to do the same. If you're looking for a curriculum, I would recommend checking out the Ron Paul Homeschool Curriculum. This will teach your children well how to live in the left-hand kingdom with classes in business, natural sciences, as well as college prep, in addition to all the usual subjects that you would expect from any curriculum, such as mathematics and history. Best thing about this curriculum is that it is self-directed after the 3rd grade, so you don't have to pull your hair out trying to stay a step ahead of your children in the curriculum. If you're interested, I'd recommend checking it out at lutherancartographer.com/homeschool. That's lutherancartographer.com/homeschool. Let's get back to our guest. What would you say to those that are thinking about moving to Boise in terms of things to watch out for, things that people should be aware of, in addition to the things that we've already addressed, such as the growing pains?
Yeah. So right now the growing pains, the housing prices are probably the big thing. There is a little bit of resistance to new people moving in, right? Because you have a lot of folks who are comfortable with the old Boise and the old Idaho that wasn't very crowded at all, and now you have a lot of people moving in. If your license plates have California on them, you probably want to smile extra hard at your neighbors, because there's just kind of an unfair bias or in that respect. So it's still a fairly good place to settle if you're not used to harsh winters. We might have a very temperate winter, or one that you've got snow on the ground for 3 or 4 months. It all depends. If you're not used to really hot summers, then it's going to be a bit of a surprise as well. So perhaps the climate is a bit more extreme than a lot of people are used to in both directions. If you are not a big fan of the outdoors, then your options for activities will be far more limited. If you are a fan of the outdoors, there are very few better places to be than southern Idaho.
I see. Let's talk now about what sort of activities or things to do or places to eat that you would recommend. If you had a friend coming into town, what would you say, oh, you got to check this out, or you got to go on this hike?
If they're from out of town, and especially the Midwest, and we have a day or two, I love to take them on a drive up into Stanley and down through Sun Valley and Ketchum and back around, so you can get a good slice of Idaho geography. Boise is not the prettiest spot. Like I said, we're on the edge of the desert, so whatever isn't irrigated is all sagebrush and dirt. But we're so close to these beautiful mountains. I have friends who fly in from the Midwest, and they see the foothills at the edge of Boise, and they say, you have such beautiful mountains here, and actually those are blocking the beautiful mountains. And so to get them up into the, just for a drive up into the Sawtooths, for instance, is a fantastic thing. There are plenty of hikes right around Boise here. We can get a good view, or else there's a marvelous green belt all the way up and down the Boise River for 25 miles in each direction from downtown. If people enjoy fishing, there's a trout stream around every corner. I won't give you my secret spots, but you can actually pick out what kind of trout you want to fish for, and then pick the appropriate stream to do so. if there's skiing, there's a ski resort about 15 miles out of town, Bogus Basin. If there's white water activities, you can go rafting close by, or else there's kayaking right on the river in Boise. Um, Restaurant-wise, we have a big enough population of everybody now where I can point you to Luciano's down the street for Italian food, or Bardonnay for good Basque food, or if you want the best cinnamon rolls, Granny C's Bakery around the corner from church is a great place to be. Um, we have vineyards close by, so we have local wineries that are fantastic to tour. If people like to tour wineries and sample, that's about 30 miles away in Caldwell. I think we're 10th in the nation for most microbreweries per capita in Idaho, which is saying something for how rural and isolated we are. So, yeah, eating activities. If people are more into the arts, we have a fairly good Baroque group that performs 4 different concerts a year. We have a symphony downtown, and again, not quite big city level stuff, but a nice afternoon.
All right. So now at this time, of course, we're recording this on the 29th of July. A lot of places are going through coronavirus restrictions from anywhere from states that are fairly loose in their restrictions, like South Dakota, to those states like California, where churches still can't really meet. So what's it like in Idaho and in Boise in particular? What are you experiencing right now?
Yeah, restrictions across the state of Idaho are pretty low right now. I guess in the national stages are kind of the same from state to state, and the state itself is stage 4. Boise, between its health department and government and just the population, is somewhere around stage 3, moving back towards stage 2. So masks are required in any public place, indoors or outdoors. Unless you can stay 6 feet apart, but then there's every sort of exception in the book. So bars are closed, restaurants with bars are open as long as you're 6 feet apart. Health clubs are mask free as long as the weight benches are 6 feet apart, whereas churches are still required to have masks at this point. Although that requirement just came back to us last night, so it's kind of an ever-changing thing. There's still a lot of freedom to move around, but masks are kind of the big thing, the new fashion accessory of Idaho, whether you like it or not.
I see. Okay, and what would you say the general attitude of the population is in terms of one of the things that absolutely shocked me back in March was seeing people begging the Washington state governor to lock down, which I never thought I would see in America. What's the kind of populist, the attitude of the populace in Boise?
Yeah, so overall, Idaho is quite independent and quite suspicious of government, and that's just kind of a historical thing. In Boise itself, that's kind of flipped. There are 2 counties that vote blue in all of Idaho, and this is one of the 2. So most of the state of Idaho is very resistant to any sorts of orders for the government. In Boise, it's far more, I think, 50-50 between old Boise and new Boise about whether or not the government has the right to tell us to wear masks or do anything else. So there's a fair amount of tension and argument, but that takes the form of heated debates on neighborhood email chats. Is as violent as it gets around here.
All right. Well, I suppose it's that is better than kind of the disagreement in the street that we might see out here in Seattle.
That's right.
All right. So as we begin to close out the podcast, I want to make sure to give you the opportunity to point our listeners to anything that you would like, whether it's your church's website, places to follow you online. Where would you like to point our listeners?
The website, if you want a little taste of Good Shepherd Lutheran Church, is gslcboise.org. And whether it's the website or Sunday morning, I describe it as kind of Meat and potatoes, Missouri Synod Lutheran Church. What you see is what you get. If you come here on a Sunday morning, we currently have 3 services to keep the attendance down below the mandatory or the maximum of 50. But when you come to church here, you'll get a service with the liturgy, with hymns, with the proclamation of the word, with the Lord's Supper, and we've been blessed with some marvelous musicians, both instrumentalists and vocalists, and so we've had the joy of working on ornamenting the service with beauty, with a lot of musical stuff over the past few years, especially, and so. I think of the old story of the Russian theologians saying we didn't know if we were in heaven or on earth when they were at the Hagia Sophia, and I can't quite say we're at that level yet, but I hope that when people come to Good Shepherd, they hear the word, they receive the supper, and then they can say, this was a place where I found rest, and I got forgiven for my sins, I received forgiveness, and it was not like the rest of the rat race out there. Very friendly congregation. We are pretty much evenly split among all generations. We've got a lot of babies who are happy to scream during the sermon, all the way up to folks in their 80s who still faithfully come to church, and so it's just a great family.
Wonderful. Thank you very much for your time today. What are your parting thoughts for our listeners, Pastor Pauls?
Well, certainly if you're in Boise, stop on by. I've listened to a few of your podcasts, everywhere from small town Wyoming up to Boston, Massachusetts, and I would just echo what my brother pastors have said, that how marvelous it is that rather than demand that we all travel to one temple in one place, the Lord comes to be with His people in all sorts of locations, and wherever 2 or 3 are gathered in His name, there He is in the midst of them and His means of grace. And so you there in Tacoma and me in Boise, we're brothers in Christ, and the same Lord is with us on Sunday morning.
Amen. Thank you again. God's peace.
Hey, thanks, Nicholas. God's peace to you.
Thanks for listening to the Lutheran Cartographer. For more about the things that we talked about today, check out the show notes page at lutherancartographer.com/35. Before you go, I want to make sure that you take a moment to subscribe to the show so you don't miss an episode. You can do that on Stitcher or on iTunes or whatever your preferred podcast provider is. And while you're there, I'd appreciate it if you'd leave a rating and a review so that more people can listen to the show. Until next time, I'm Nicholas Weber. Thanks for listening. I'll talk to you soon.